There are moments in life when words just feel too small. Saying goodbye to someone we love is one of those moments. It's as if all of a sudden time stands still. Everything around us keeps moving, but inside, everything stops. And then comes the silence. A silence filled with memories, with love, with questions that may never have answers. No one ever truly feels prepared for this moment. Even when we know it's coming, even when life gives us signs, the feeling is always the same, that there wasn't enough time for one more hug, one more conversation, one more I love you. If you're going through this or have been through it, please know you're not alone. Some feelings, though deeply personal, are also universal. The pain of goodbye, the emptiness of absence, the struggle to figure out what to do with everything that's left behind, these are experiences that touch us all at some point in life. But even in grief, something unexpected can happen. Sometimes in the midst of mourning, lessons emerge, lessons we never saw coming. They're born in the silence of a room, in the touch of a hand, in a final glance. This video is a space for those stories. Stories of people who have lived through goodbye. Real stories, honest, human, and more than just talking about loss, they speak of love, of what truly matters when time starts slipping through our fingers. Maybe, by listening to these stories, you'll find that even in farewell, there is still life to be found, and that love never truly leaves. When goodbye happens, or even when it's just approaching, something shifts inside us. It's as if a part of life loses its meaning, and the world, which once felt ordered, suddenly seems strange and disconnected. Grief takes many forms. Yes, it often comes as sadness, but it also shows up as confusion, exhaustion, anxiety. Sometimes it's a tight knot in the chest. Other times, an emptiness that can't be explained. And almost always, it brings with it a silent question that echoes endlessly. Did I do enough? Was I present enough? Did I say everything I needed to say? Was I someone who brought comfort, or someone who hid from what I didn't know how to face? Grief has this cruel ability to bring regrets, doubts, and memories that suddenly feel much heavier. And in the midst of all this turmoil, many people feel alone. Even when surrounded by others, there's a kind of loneliness no one can see, because deep down, everyone grieves in their own way. And sometimes the pain makes it seem like no one else in the world could possibly understand what you're feeling. But what if there are words, gestures, experiences that can somehow light a small spark along the way? What if hearing from those who have already made this journey could help you find a bit of peace? That's exactly why we're here. In the midst of it all, the pain, the loneliness, the unanswered questions, something deeply human can become an anchor, listening to stories. Because when we hear someone share their own journey, we begin to realize that despite the unique shape of each person's pain, there is something that connects us. And that connection has a simple name: humanity. The stories you're about to hear aren't about endings. They're actually about everything that remains, about the small yet powerful gestures that, in the face of life's fragility, reveal what truly matters. These are the voices of those who have been there, who have lived through goodbye and, in the midst of loss, also found love, meaning, and often a path toward healing. And maybe, as you listen, you'll come to see that love, even when life comes to an end, doesn't. The importance of being present. When my father got sick, I asked myself over and over if I'd have the strength to stay by his side until the end. That's how Anna, an only child, begins her story about accompanying her father through his final months. She shares that at first, the idea of witnessing the process of saying goodbye felt almost unbearable. I was so afraid of seeing him suffer, of not knowing what to say, of not having the right words to comfort him. And honestly, I was even afraid that my own pain might spill over and somehow get in the way of that moment. In the early days, Anna tried hard to talk, to fill the silence. She would start conversations, share memories, ask questions. But over time, she noticed her father wasn't responding the same way. Words began to fade, yet somehow their connection seemed to grow stronger. That's when I realized something very simple, but very powerful. I didn't need to say anything. Just being there was enough. Holding his hand, looking into his eyes, gently touching his face, all of that spoke louder than any sentence ever could. She recalls one particular day that she says she'll never forget. The room was quiet. You could only hear his breathing, a little slower than before. I sat beside him, took his hand, and stayed. I didn't speak. I didn't ask anything. I just stayed. And at one point, he squeezed my hand in return. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. But in that small gesture, there was everything. There was love, there was gratitude, there was goodbye. In the days that followed, Anna began to understand that presence is a form of language, a silent language, but a deeply powerful one. Things we often spend our whole lives trying to express with words, love, care, gratitude, can be said simply by being there. I realized that love also lives in silence, that sometimes it's not about having the right words or even knowing what to say. It's about holding the hand of someone you love and making it clear, I'm here. You're not alone. When her father passed, Anna says she felt immense sadness, as expected, but also a deep peace. I knew I had done what truly mattered, that he left this world feeling he wasn't alone. And for me, that made all the difference in my own grieving process. By sharing her story, Anna leaves a message that echoes through many stories of goodbye. If I could say something to anyone going through this, it would be, don't worry so much about the words. Sometimes the greatest expression of love is simply being there. Silence, when it's shared, is never empty. Story 2, Forgiveness and Reconciliation. Not every goodbye happens in a space of harmony. Some come weighted with unresolved history, old wounds, and silences that have built up over years. That was the case with Marcos and his older brother, Paulo. We went nearly 10 years without speaking. A silly argument, like most are when you look back with some distance. But at the time, it felt impossible to overcome, Marcos recalls. When they received the news that their mother was gravely ill and in palliative care, both knew that somehow they'd need to reconnect. Her illness didn't just bring the closeness of the end, it also made it painfully clear how much time we had wasted. While we were apart, she was getting older, and now there wasn't much time left. The reunion wasn't easy. It was filled with awkwardness, avoided glances, broken sentences. But strangely, within the hospital environment, the reasons for their old argument started to shrink. Seeing her, so fragile, lying in that bed, everything that had once felt so big between us suddenly felt small, far too small. In the first few days, they barely spoke. They shared care shifts, managed medications, but hardly looked each other in the eye. Until one morning, as they were adjusting their mother's pillow together, she reached out, took both their hands, and said in a voice already faint, "I just want to see you two well, together, before I go." It was as if that one sentence brought down a wall built over years. We both started crying, uncontrollably, and right there, holding her hand, the words finally came, but in a different way, not as accusations or justifications, but as confessions. "I'm sorry. Me too. Forgive me." And for the first time in a long time, we hugged. Marcos says that, in the days that followed, something completely shifted between them. They began to take turns, not just with caregiving, but with conversation, shared memories, and the shy laughter that slowly returned. That time, which we thought would be only about grief, became a time of healing too, not just for her, but for both of us. When their mother passed, Marcos says that alongside the pain of loss, he felt a kind of relief that's hard to explain. "I didn't carry with me the weight of eternal regret. We had time, brief as it was, to say what needed to be said, and to rebuild, even at the end, what life had left undone. His message is clear. The end of life has this way of revealing what truly matters. And almost always, what matters isn't who was right, but whether there's still time to love, to forgive, and to be forgiven. Story 3. The power of small gestures. Not every goodbye is marked by grand conversations or dramatic moments. Sometimes, what truly remains are the little things, so simple that in the rush of life, they might even go unnoticed. That's what Juliana learned while caring for her grandmother, Donna Celia, during her final months. My grandmother had advanced Alzheimer's. Most of the time, she didn't know who I was anymore. She didn't remember my name or our relationship. But interestingly, there was one thing she always remembered, that I made coffee for her. Juliana recalls that ever since she was a child, afternoon coffee at her grandmother's house was a ritual. Always at 4 o'clock, with warm bread and that smell that seemed to wrap the whole house in a hug. When she got sick, I kept making coffee for her, even if she no longer recognized who was there. One day, while preparing the coffee, Juliana noticed her grandmother, who could barely speak, still following the movement of the aromas. She'd close her eyes, take a deep breath, and it felt like she found herself in that familiar scent. For a few moments, everything seemed at peace. That's when Juliana realized how powerful small gestures could be, something illness couldn't erase. I couldn't have long conversations with her anymore, but I could still rub lotion on her hands, brush her hair, play the music she loved in her youth, and of course, make the coffee. And in her own way, she responded. Sometimes with a smile, sometimes by squeezing my hand, and that was enough. In her final days, Donna Celia no longer opened her eyes. But even then, Juliana continued the ritual. I made the coffee, poured it into the same cup she always used, brought it to her room and said, "It's ready, Grandma. Your coffee is here." And at that moment, I swear she moved her lips slightly, as if she recognized those words. Juliana is certain. Those small rituals were acts of love, a love that didn't need to be explained or spoken. It was through those small things that I was able to say goodbye. Not with big speeches, but with the language of care, memory, and presence. She says that after her grandmother's passing, many people asked if it wasn't too painful to have been so close during that time. And her answer is always the same. Of course it was. But at the same time, it was the most beautiful experience I've ever had. I learned that loving someone until the very end is often not about grand gestures. It's about being there, making the coffee, rubbing the lotion, playing the music, holding the hand. Those are the gestures that remain. They're what turn into memory when everything else is gone. Story 4, acceptance and letting go. It's not always easy to accept that goodbye is near. The mind resists, the heart fights back. That was exactly the path Clara walked as she accompanied her husband, Ricardo, through his illness. When we got the diagnosis, I went into battle mode. I wanted to fix it, find treatments, search for alternatives. I spent months trying to save him, trying to extend his life, trying to keep it all from happening, Clara recalls. But over time, it became clear that a cure was no longer possible. What remained now was care and acceptance. It was a huge shock. I felt powerless, lost. How could there be nothing left to do? We spend our whole lives trying to control everything. And suddenly, life shows you there are things that just are. At first, she rejected the idea of palliative care. It felt like accepting it meant giving up on him, like I was agreeing to let him go. And I wasn't ready. But slowly, with support from the medical team and the conversations she had with Ricardo himself, something inside her began to shift. He told me something I'll never forget. "Clara, I don't want you to fight against death. I want you to fight for the life we still have." That understanding changed everything. We stopped focusing on the illness and started focusing on the time we had left. On good days, we'd sit on the porch, have coffee while looking at the sky. We watched our favorite movies. He loved jazz, so we'd spend hours listening to music, not saying anything, just feeling the moment. Clara shares that in the final days, Ricardo became quieter, but with a serenity she hadn't thought possible. He'd hold my hand, look into my eyes, and simply say, "It's okay." And somehow I felt that he truly meant it, that he really was at peace. On the day he passed, Clara was by his side. No desperate tears, no resistance, no fighting against what couldn't be changed. Just presence, love, and surrender. I held his hand until his last breath, and in that moment I realized that sometimes loving someone until the end isn't about keeping them from leaving. It's about making sure they don't leave alone, that they go in peace, that they go feeling loved. Today, Clara still carries the pain of his absence, but also a deep gratitude for having understood, in time, that acceptance isn't giving up, that surrendering to what life brings, even when it's death, can be paradoxically one of the deepest acts of love. If I could leave one message, she says, it's this: don't wait until the end to start living what really matters. Because in the end, what remains is the love that was lived. What we learn from these stories. What do these stories have in common? What do they reveal about love, about life, and above all about death? If there's something that echoes strongly in each one, it's that when the end draws near, everything that once seemed urgent loses its importance. The demands, the grudges, the unfinished tasks, the everyday fears, all of it fades, and in its place, only the essential remains: presence, love, care, forgiveness, surrender. Anna's story taught us that often it's not about having the right words or making grand declarations. It's about being there, holding a hand, sitting in silence that, when shared, doesn't hurt, it comforts. With Marcos and Paulo, we learned that the end of life can also be an invitation to reconciliation, that it's not always possible to fix everything, but it is possible to choose, even if late, love over pride. That saying, "I'm sorry," can be one of the deepest ways to say goodbye and to heal. Juliana and her grandmother, Dona Celia, reminded us that bonds are often built through small gestures. Through a cup of coffee, lotion on the hands, soft music in the background, that even when memory fades, when words are lost, affection still finds its way. And that these simple acts, in the end, become giants in the memory of those who remain. And with Clara and Ricardo, we came to understand that acceptance is not giving up, that there is immense dignity in letting go, that to care, to love, to be there until the very last breath can be just as transformative as any effort to fight the inevitable. And that, in the end, it's not about prolonging life at any cost, but about living what time remains with depth and love. These stories aren't just about saying goodbye. They are about love in its purest and rawest form, about humanity, about choosing to show up, even when it's hard, about letting go of what doesn't matter and embracing fully what truly does. And maybe that's the greatest lesson. We don't have to wait for the end to live this way. What these families discovered at life's edge is something we can and should bring into our everyday lives while there's still time. Maybe today is the day to make that phone call you've been putting off, to forgive someone you love, not because they necessarily deserve it, but because you deserve not to carry that burden anymore, to say, "I love you" with less shame, less restraint, to be more present, to turn off the autopilot, to sit together, to listen, to look into someone's eyes. Because in the end, when everything else falls away, only love remains. And if there's something death teaches us, in its relentless yet generous way, it's that life, true life, happens in the connections, in the embraces, in the small gestures and the words that, when spoken in time, can change everything. May these stories not be distant accounts, but invitations. Invitations to look at the people we love now, to love more, to forgive more, to be there more. Because yes, death is part of life. And paradoxically, it's often when we face it head on that we finally begin to understand what it truly means to live.